Well, hello and welcome to Polity Matters. My name is Ben Ratliff, and I'm joined, as always, by Scott Edberg and Jared Nelson. And we are glad to be with you today to really go through some autobiographical content. Just before we hit record, Scott reminded us that we've all gone through Chapter 18 of the BCO before. All of us were ordained teaching elders in the PCA, and so this was once our roadmap and our instruction and the very thing we were trying to accomplish, trying to get behind us. And we're glad we have, but it's still important to go through and discuss. So we're in BCO 18. So make sure you turn there so that you can read along, pull it up on the PCAAC.org website, find a copy. We're going to work through it. There's some longer sections here. But before that, Scott, you been reading anything good lately?
I've been actually, since the last episode, I've read 3 full books of Dune, and now I'm on my 4th one, and it gets kind of wacky. And so if you've ever read any Dune, you probably want to stop after the second one. There's a reason why they've never made a movie after the second book. I'll just say that. And so they're good, but they get kind of spacey and odd.
My wife enjoyed them about until book 4, and then she couldn't really go any further past that. She said,
I mean, a human
trippy.
being becomes like a megaton sandworm.
Yeah, spoiler alert. Thank you.
Yeah,
Sorry.
spoiler.
Yeah, come on,
This is written in the 1970s. You gotta, it's long past that.
Here's my question: Is Dune our far past or our far future? I just want to know: Are we heading towards it, or
Future.
did we come from it? It's the future.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
because
boy.
computers kill everyone. You've not read. You're disgraceful.
I've not read what.
Dune.
I have not.
I know, and you're
Yeah.
revealing yourself. Oh. Yeah, so they don't like computers, and so like to use anything like computer based is like a shaming.
You were that
What just
offended.
happened?
You were that offended.
No,
You're
like the
that-
whole. It just all stopped.
That's what happens when you offend Dune.
So yeah, it's an anti-AI thing. Did you turn on AI, Scott? Did it sense that you were anti-AI and it nuked you?
I hope that we didn't lose any of the recordings. Oh boy!
Like the first episode? The first episode should be processed, right?
Scott Edberg is requesting you to turn on AI. Okay, we are still recording an episode, so everybody's getting all this. So sorry, listener. In the future, we're going to go the opposite of Dune, and we're actually just going to get Zoom AI to listen to us and then produce an episode for us. We're not even going to record ourselves anymore.
In Dune, the humans become the computers.
That might be our title. The humans become the computers. Okay.
Partly by using drugs. There's a theme in Dune.
Lots of drugs.
A candidate for the ministry is a member of the church in full communion who, believing himself to be called to preach the gospel, submits himself to the care and guidance of the Presbytery in his course of study and of practical training to prepare himself for this office. That's what the whole chapter is about. And so we've got some of the basics laid out, and we'll get into some of the details. But immediately we see, leading from 16 and 17, now coming into 18, somebody that has a sense of call to vocational ministry, somebody that is pursuing ordination in the way that we've discussed. What does a candidate for ministry, that's what they're talking about, need to do in order to pursue that vocational ordained ministry? And the first thing is he needs to be a member in full communion. Later on, it specifies how long he needs to be a member of a PCA church, but here it's just saying he needs to be a member of the church. He can't just be some dude, I guess, is what they're saying. Maybe there's more significance there that my brain can't comprehend, but there it is. He needs to believe himself to be called to preach the gospel. I want to stop here and talk about this for a second. Called to preach the gospel. There's a lot of ordained guys out there that would say they don't feel called to preach the gospel. Maybe they're just doing youth ministry. I'm not saying they're not speaking the gospel, but if we talk about preaching in a technical sense, what do you guys think about this? What do you see coming through your presbyteries? We have a lot of ordained guys. I don't always feel like this is a huge emphasis in the PCA, that ordained ministry is for preaching of the gospel.
Well, definitely for ruling elders, there are those that are called to do mostly shepherding work, teaching work, but not preaching of the gospel. And so somebody may have a call to be an elder and work in Christ Church, but if it's not to preach the gospel, maybe they're called to be a ruling elder within the church. And that is a good task to do. You're more likely to get on committees if you want to do that. But I don't know if it's really saying that you don't feel primarily called to preach the gospel, then you shouldn't. I mean, there are people who do a lot of ministry that they will occasionally fill the pulpit, but most of their ministry is focused week in and week out on things that are other than preaching the gospel. But if you're a teaching elder, you should be able to preach the gospel and should feel some sort of a call to do that within your ministry.
Yeah, just on the chance that I've offended somebody already, with how long we've been recording for like 2 minutes so far, sometimes it doesn't take long. I was thinking about my own experience coming out of seminary. I didn't think I wanted to be a preacher, but I did pursue ordination thinking that that was the proper thing to do. And this particular paragraph itself was very helpful for me in the long run, that as I developed that sense of call to preach in particular, I realized the importance of ordination for that particular task. So I didn't mean to call out youth ministers in general. Although maybe, well, never mind. So that individual, the candidate for ministry, he's a member of the church. He believes he's called to preach. He submits himself to the care and guidance of the presbytery in his course of study and of practical training. And so he needs to come under the care of a presbytery as he seeks the ordained office. This is where I'm interested in our experience in our presbyteries that we've been in, because a lot of this stuff needs to be brought down to the ground. Scott, I wanted to ask you, because you were a candidate intern like I was in Mississippi Valley. What was that like for you? You had a great internship, I know, and so I'm curious how this worked for you as you think back on it.
Yeah, and we'll get into some of the more granular details as the paragraphs go on, but I thought Presbytery Mississippi Valley had a wonderful process for ordination, and they were very hands-on, in my opinion. And so when I came under care, when I became a member of First Pres in Yazoo, Charlie Wingard wanted me to begin the candidacy process immediately. He said, we're not waiting until your third or fourth year in seminary. You're going to start within your first 6 months. And so I became a member of the church. I was in my fall semester at RTS right after the summer, and I became a member. And what was expected in the candidacy from PMV was that you would regularly interact with the credentials committee, not when you wanted to complete a step or merely perhaps move up the ladder towards ordination. You're regularly, quarterly sending reports to them of your current ministry, what you're doing, and you weren't supposed to merely like copy and paste your report from quarter to quarter. You'd get in trouble for that, actually. And so you had to write, what have you done this quarter? What do you want to let the presbytery know that, well, what's your ministry looking like? And then the presbytery would receive those and read those. And then you do the yearly obvious update that we'll get into later, but it was very hands-on. And I felt that and believe that coupled with RTS being so local, where you had more hands-on internship preparation, I found it to be a very helpful process. It was very hands-on, in my opinion.
I started the process in North Texas for licensure that eventually I was ordained in Ileana. But it was kind of a joke. I was the guy who was leading it at that time was in charge of the candidates. His name was Dave Boxerman. And he would joke when we came under care that now we were under the neglect of presbytery rather than under the care of presbytery. And it just made me think of that when I read in Smith. He complains that the presbytery all too often does not give them any guidance regarding their study or training. And there is something for candidates to think about is it's very easy for the other elders to be involved with their own church and not really be reaching out to you. So there is some initiative that maybe you need to seek out some of these people to say like, hey, I want some input. I want some experience even outside of my church. Because presbytery sometimes is too passive in these things. And this is supposed to be, if they're submitting to the care of presbytery probably should ask them to do something every now and then.
Mm-hmm. So as the first paragraph opens up this submission to the care and guidance of the presbytery, the next section and following open up what this looks like. They sort of expound upon and give the details for what being under care is. Guys, I should have asked before we started recording, how do we want to handle some of these paragraphs? These are long sections. Do you want me to read all of 18.2 and then we'll handle it, or do you want me to go just, paragraph by paragraph through the sections? I'll do whatever one.
Fine.
Okay, I'll do whatever somebody tells me to do. So sounds good. So starting there in 18.2, the first part of it, every applicant for the ministry must put himself under the care of Presbytery, which should ordinarily be the presbytery that has jurisdiction of the church of which he is a member. The endorsement of his session must be given to the presbytery, consisting of testimonials regarding his Christian character and promise of usefulness in the ministry. The endorsement should also describe the activities of ministry the applicant has participated in with brief evaluation.
What I find interesting here is the word ordinarily. There is some flexibility. The word ordinarily is, in my opinion, the best word in the English language, because it offers you the latitude to not do what you said you should do. And this is, well, I guess, one of those examples. You ordinarily seek to come under care of a presbytery within the jurisdiction of your local church, but it's not mandated. And so there seems to be some flexibility. I'm perhaps curious on what that flexibility is, but there seems to be some flexibility on where your church membership resides and where the presbytery's oversight also is.
I suppose it could be that a man's going to seminary in a region of which he's not a member. So his church is, in Pennsylvania, and he's going to seminary in RTS in Jackson, and he doesn't want to leave the church membership in Pennsylvania, but he's able to be under care of the presbytery in Mississippi, just because that's who's local and taking care of him.
Yeah, maybe he's associate member, but he's not a full member of that church.
Sure.
So
yeah, that's good.
You're given some room for some latitude there.
Yeah. And I knew some guys in seminary who maintained their care status with their presbytery back home and would come and get educated and do internship in Jackson. But they sort of had dual citizenship, as it were, not between churches, but between presbyteries even, which, some of that's very technical and practical. But
well, I think a lot of this is about not the qualification for an elder that he's not a recent convert. This is looking into, is he not merely somebody that's presenting himself, but he has a history of just being a good Christian church member, and testimonials there.
Yeah, and that continues on in the second part of 18.2. Every applicant for care shall be a member of the congregation whose session provides an endorsement for at least 6 months before filing his application, except in those cases deemed extraordinary by the presbytery. So, you'll get a guy who wants to be a candidate for ministry in the PCA. He's been interested in Reformed theology. Maybe he's just kind of come over to the Presbyterian ways of belief and conviction, but he's not been a member of the PCA at all. But he wants to get ordained there. He needs to join a church first, be there for 6 months at least, and then that session can endorse him to the presbytery and put him up as a candidate for ministry. I actually had forgotten about the clause here that there are extraordinary cases that the presbytery can deem appropriate to shorten, I guess, this amount of time. You guys ever seen that happen or ever done it?
No, I think it seems that the threshold is so low already. By the time that you would want to come before presbytery, 6 months likely has elapsed, right? Yeah. And so unless it's a real, you have really neglected your calling and you're about to graduate in 2 months and now you need to do everything quicker, but you've not been, it just seems such a rare circumstance.
Especially considering that presbyteries are only required to meet twice a year anyway.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Most of us meet more than that, but that's an interesting, yeah. Well,
I knew a guy who was being called in the RP, and he had been a member of the Free Church of Scotland. And so there was elements of this that they were like, okay, he's not a member nearby, and they don't have to follow this, but you can imagine that somebody's coming over from England or something like that. You can speed that up if they've been a member somewhere else that's outside of the denomination.
I think we should lengthen it for people like that. Like, no, you need to hit 18 months before we're. What, Scott?
That's outlined later in the end of 18, where it says dealing with transfers and those who are outside of our communion, how would we transfer them in? And so,
you think we've read to the end of 18 On
I don't
the
know.
day that we're recording an episode on 18?
No.
Man, you think too much of us.
The question would be is if he's a church member but not yet a minister in a different denomination, maybe that
Yeah.
would apply here.
But it seems rather obvious, right? How could a session put someone forward that they don't know? I think that's kind of the whole point of 18.2 is you have to at least know the man. He has to have been among you at least for 6 months before you give an endorsement. Because how can you endorse? I mean, it's even difficult perhaps to endorse a man after 6 months, right? How well do you know someone with only 6 months? And so it is a bare minimum sort of thing. I think it's something good to have when we're training anyone though for office, not merely for pastors, but for ruling elders and deacons. It's perhaps a good threshold to have that you're a member of this congregation for 6 months before you'd be considered an elder in the church or a deacon, maybe even longer. But it's good to have a minimal time frame, I think. And 6 months is where we land.
I remember when I came under care of Mississippi Valley, that one of the elders from our session, and I knew most of them pretty well, but one of them came and sat with me in my living room and had a list of questions, and he asked me these questions that were helpful for him in forming the session of whether they should endorse me or not. But he walked through a bunch of, what parts of theology was I interested in, what aspects of ministry was I interested in doing. I mean, they really tried to kind of delve deep and get to know me on a more ministry level, if that makes sense. And I just remember feeling very cared for by those men, that they didn't just, kind of write a couple thoughts on a piece of paper and sign it off, but, stamp it. But it was actually something they gave some time and effort into, which is what we need, right? That's what our men need as they're coming under care, is they need their elders to be there with them. Let's finish 18.2. Every applicant must file his application with the clerk of the presbytery at least 1 month before the meeting of the presbytery. An applicant for care may not be received under care and examined for ordination at the same meeting of the presbytery, since he must serve a period of at least 1 year of internship prior to ordination. An applicant for internship is obliged to be under care and may be licensed to preach the gospel. Further, one who is not already under care may be taken under care, be licensed to preach the gospel, and become an intern at the same meeting of presbytery. That's a lot of technical specification for what can or can't happen together at the same time. I mean, the biggest thing going on here is that you cannot be brought under care and ordained in the same meeting. Why is that so important, guys?
Because you can't complete an entire internship at one local point in time. And so there has to be a time of engagement and oversight and evaluation. And so you can do basically everything but that final step if you want to make that last paragraph simple. You just can't be ordained and become a candidate with an outstanding internship in play. Maybe you were a candidate at another presbytery and you completed your internship and you're transferring into this new presbytery, then you can be ordained because you've already completed that prerequisite. But that middle prerequisite, you need that to be completed, and you can't do that without any actual time elapsing.
And if you're wondering, internships are going to come into play in chapter 19. We're not going to get into those in detail here, but Jared, sorry, go ahead.
I think there's an intention throughout the BCO on this, that we not be hasty in the laying on of hands. I mean, really, these are things that are meant to slow us down. Sometimes we get angry that the BCO takes so long, but the BCO is meant to slow us down in some parts, and this is one of them. We shouldn't be hasty in the laying on of hands, and this helps us not be that.
Just you saying that gives me a little bit of pause. I would appreciate if our BCO had a little bit more details like these for the other offices that we ordain men to. The ruling elders and deacons, there's some material in our BCO about how to go about, training them, getting them ordained. But there's not a length of time like this ever specified. There's never really any indication how long a ruling elder or deacon candidate has to be trained before he can be ordained. It seems if we do hold to a parity of ruling and teaching, that there should be some more specification as to what is required of a ruling elder candidate, and would be beneficial to them. Give some weight to it. And maybe I'm mistaken.
We changed our process in our church a bit, that we have an open time of nominations. And if someone is nominated who's been in that office before, they're going to be installed within an election and installed within the next 2 months. However, if they've never held that office before, they have to wait a year for training, at least until the next year, and then they'll be on the ballot before that happens. And so that was just a way for us to say, let's not be too hasty with training nominations for people who have not been elder or deacon before.
Yeah. It's funny, the teaching time can impart the knowledge that we find necessary for an officer, but the time component can often bring out the character matters that need to be evaluated. I really like that, Nelson. We need to get that over here. 18.3. The applicant shall appear before the presbytery in person and shall be examined by the presbytery on experiential religion and on his motives for seeking the ministry. If the testimonials and the examination prove satisfactory, the presbytery shall receive him under its care after the following manner. The moderator shall propose to the applicant these questions. Do you promise in reliance upon the grace of God to maintain a becoming Christian character and to be diligent and faithful in making full preparation for the sacred ministry? And secondly, do you promise to submit yourself to the proper supervision of the presbytery in matters that concern your preparation for the ministry? If these questions be answered in the affirmative, the moderator or someone appointed by him shall give the candidate brief charge, and the proceeding shall close with prayer. The name of the applicant is then to be recorded on the presbytery's roll of candidates for the ministry. Scott, you're a presbytery clerk, so this should be I don't know how familiar, depending on how often y'all do this, but it should be fairly familiar paragraph to you because this is sort of written for you in many cases. It's exactly what needs to happen in the meeting as candidates come through. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts here?
The PCA has really streamlined this with the Presbytery portal, where it's really easy to add and remove people. And so there's not a lot of involved. You just kind of add them to your registry, and you have to, as a clerk, make sure that remains accurate and that there are updates given by that man, lest you want RPR to incur judgment from them. And so it's not really a difficult process. Usually the candidate will sign something, there will be a charge given, and you'll pray, and there's not a lot of work with it. Honestly, the clerk doesn't really have to do too much with a lot of these. They just have to do the record keeping. But the credentials committee oversees most of the other hard work.
Yeah. Jared, I want to say you've moderated your presbytery before. Am I correct, or is that? Yeah. So have you been in a situation like this where you've been in the role of moderator in this particular scenario?
Oh, where you have to impose the questions. I don't remember that I did this, but it is something that it's interesting that you kind of break up the meeting and then you ask these questions, and it gives a little bit of weight to the solemnness of what's going on there. I think one of the questions though that comes up from this is something that was not involved in the 70s is, can this whole process happen electronically? CCB has suggested that it could, if it's in your standing or your stated rules, your standing rules of your presbytery. But new technologies, new day has some new questions here that maybe this is saying you can't do it by letter, but could you do it by Zoom?
Well, I mean, y'all are well aware that I was transferred into our presbytery over a Zoom meeting, which I suppose may have been illegal, and maybe I'm not actually a member here yet. But
Nope.
I do like the fact that it used the phrase experiential religion.
Mm-hmm.
You got some of our Puritan roots in there.
That's what we call our the name of our character exam in Covenant Presbytery. We call it the experiential religion exam. When we ask them all the hard questions. Yeah, it's this is for a candidate at least. This is kind of a big deal. My brother just became a candidate in the Presbytery of Mississippi Valley not long ago, and he got to have these questions posed to him and a charge given. It's not so as let me rephrase. It doesn't have the same weight that ordination does, right, later on in your ministry, but this is a big deal, to come under the care of a presbytery and to have these questions. They're serious questions. Very, very similar to the vows officers take. You're promising to do some things that take a lot of work and a lot of attention and a lot of character, and so no man should put himself under these vows and promises lightly. Okay, good. 18.4 says the candidate continues to be a private member of the church and subject to the jurisdiction of the session, but as respects his preparatory training for the ministry, he is under the oversight of the presbytery. It shall be the duty of the presbytery to show a kindly and sympathetic interest in him, and to give him counsel and guidance in regard to his studies, his practical training, and the institutions of learning he should attend. In no case may a candidate omit from his course of study any of the subjects prescribed in the form of government as tests for ordination, without obtaining the consent of the presbytery. And where such consent is given, the presbytery shall record the fact and the reasons thereof. I won't say this in an accusatory way, but as a confessional type way, this is where I find it very difficult to be a good presbyter. How to relate to our candidates kindly and sympathetically can be a very challenging task, and there's various reasons for that. But what do you guys think about this? What's important for us to point out to our listeners here?
Well, there's kind of like there's a problem you're dealing with when a candidate comes before of jurisdiction of where he will remain. And there's this weird quasi dual jurisdiction where the presbytery has some oversight over the man with guidance and preparation, but the church remains the essential jurisdiction and oversight. And so a presbytery wouldn't draft charges against a candidate. That would be something that the local church would do. But that just kind of frames perhaps where the person remains a member. And so they remain a member in the local church insofar until they are ordained. But there's still this odd tension where they are regularly attending presbyteries, involved in the work of presbyteries as it relates to their ordination process. But there's this slight tension that the paragraph opens with and reminds us of where those lines are cut.
Our presbytery, or at least our committee, has sometimes taken care with somebody that is at a particular seminary to tell them, okay, here's where there might be some blind spots from that presbytery. And so just make sure that you are studying this. So we've had that with people that come from RPTS. Like we say, now remember to study PCA polity because it's a bit different than theirs. And so this is, instead of just letting them step on the landmines and saying, haha, you messed up, saying beforehand, look, these are the extra questions that come out and difference of perspective from the seminary that you're attending, and maybe some more study that you're going to need to do because you're there.
I'm curious what y'all think. Should a man become a candidate for ministry before he enters seminary? Because the reason I think about that is because it says that they give him counsel and guidance in regard to his studies, his practical training, and the institutions of learning he should attend. In my experience, in my own personal experience, and then what I observe of other men, is that they enroll in seminary and then they try to figure out their candidacy. But this seems to indicate that at least at a basic level, maybe the man should be considering candidacy as early as possible, and even have the input of his presbytery before he goes off to seminary.
Yes.
I think that's really important for us to pay attention to. Men, we've kind of moved into a world where guys decide, I'm going to go be a pastor. And really what our BCO is saying is that the session and the presbytery need to have input on even that decision.
It's probably less the responsibility of the presbytery because they don't know who's heading that direction.
That's true.
But you in your church need to say, hey, as you're looking at seminaries, let's get you under care of presbytery and see if they have some input for you in direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, sometimes there's even scholarships that the presbytery offers. And so it could be financially beneficial to you to know those things too.
Yeah. When I was in Chicago Metro, my undergrad was at Moody Bible Institute. And so I was looking towards coming under care of Chicago Metro. And the only reason I didn't come under care of Chicago Metro is the timeline was I was going to come under care and then move to Jackson. And so we decided with my pastor and I that maybe it's just better to wait a few months, get your footing in Jackson, become a member there, and then pursue it. But we were debating that exact idea, especially if you have like a ministerial undergrad. You're kind of doing ministry in the midst anyway. Yeah, I had some sermons under my belt, perhaps slightly earlier than most Presbyterians because of my education. And so I think I wish I could have become a member of Chicago Metro and built some relationships, but we were still becoming Presbyterian at that time, so we weren't able to.
18.5, for the development of his Christian character, for the service he can render, and for his more effective training, the candidate, when entering on his theological studies, should be authorized and encouraged by the Presbytery to conduct public worship, to expound the Scriptures to the people, and to engage in other forms of Christian work. These forms of service should be rendered under the direction of Presbytery and also with the sanction and under the guidance of the candidate's instructors during the time of his being under their instruction. A candidate should not undertake to serve a church which is without a pastor as regular supply unless he has been licensed and approved for that supply by the Presbytery having jurisdiction of the church. So being a candidate for ministry doesn't mean you just go on youth trips as a chaperone. There's more to it than simply being a warm body, is what this is getting at. And I guess it's pretty self-explanatory that the man needs to have places to test his gifts and to get used to the regular rhythms of pastoral ministry. What do you guys see? What did you experience being very important for yourselves and for the men you've helped train in this particular area?
There's a bit of a debate even within our own presbytery of does this basically move quickly towards being licensed to preach? How quickly should you move towards that, or at all? Do you just go and become go for ordination and skip license to preach? But some of us, some people in our committee, encourage people to be licensed to preach near the end of their seminary career to get a taste of ordination and things like that. But there's a certain point of how often are you doing these things? You're expounding the Scriptures. Is this Sunday school? Is this occasionally filling in for preaching? It shouldn't be too regular because you're still in training, but you need to get some feedback on some of those things.
And in other parts, we'll get to how regular is irregular.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was in seminary under Charlie, I was pretty much doing the full scope in an abridged way of the ministry. And so I was preaching regularly. And so I preached once a month. Whenever Charlie was away, I'd preach a morning service. He would have me lead services regularly. I was pretty much doing everything he was doing, except instead of doing it as a full-time job, it was more part-time to prepare me. And I found it to be some of the most helpful. I know that in RTS in Jackson, a lot of guys will go on the circuit and they will preach regularly almost every week on the circuit because there's all these churches in the Mississippi Delta and beyond that don't have pastors. And so they just kind of ping pong from church to church, preaching, getting experience. But I found that working under a pastor and his guidance to be very helpful with these various spheres where he was directing me. He was giving me directives and correctives when I erred in order to try to make me a future, to safeguard my future as a minister. And so I think there's an essential part of a mentor leading a man in a way that is basically an ordained officer with training wheels, where he gets to do most of the things that the pastor does, but in a limited capacity.
Ordained officer with training
wheels.
Sorry. Got to keep a list of potential titles. What did we just do? 6 or 7?
That was 5.
Now we're on 6. 18.6. The Presbytery shall require every candidate for the ministry under its care to make a report to it at least once a year, and it shall secure from his instructors an annual report upon his deportment, diligence, and progress in study. And according to Scott in Mississippi Valley, you can't just copy and paste with the last thing you gave them and add a little bit here and there. You have to tell your presbytery what's going on.
And apparently your seminary teachers need to tell how you're doing.
Apparently.
So I think this lends to, you probably should be under care before you go into seminary, just as a general rule. It's more helpful to be than it is not. Now, also, this is candidates. This is not every pastor. I know somebody was asking, like, wait, are pastors supposed to give a report every year? It's like, no, not unless you're a candidate.
Yeah. Or out of bounds.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you love your wife, you'll come under care before you go into seminary. If you love your family, if you want to care for them well, that's what you'll do. You just have to do it early. Don't wait. Care for your family by coming under care.
Why do you say that? I know what you mean, but...
Yeah, I say that because if you decide 6 months before you graduate, you're going to come under care and start doing all of these things, they're going to take away from actually securing a call. And if you do even secure a call, you're gonna you're putting a church in a hard position where they have to wait for you to actually become their pastor, because you have to do this internship and you have to do all these extra steps. And then your wife has to wait, and you might not get a job because of all of those extra steps that a church doesn't want to have to go through. And so you want to be prepared and ready. And how you're prepared and ready is do everything you can before you graduate to prepare yourself for the next step of ordination exams. That's either you stop at the internship level, like you must complete your internship, in my opinion, before you graduate, but perhaps even be licensed. So then when you step into your first call, you're ready to take those exams and be ordained, and your ministry is not put on hold and your family's not put on hold. Everyone is ready, lockstep, ready to go. And so if you love your family, if you love your future ministry, complete as much as you can before you graduate, because you're so focused anyway in your studies at that time. You might as well do as much as you can before the rubber actually hits the road.
It's good. Yeah, avoid the cramming mentality. Don't try to just,
do your year internship in 6 months.
For real. Yeah. 18.7. The presbytery may, upon application of the candidate, give a certificate of dismission to another presbytery. The candidate may be allowed to retain membership in his home church upon the request of his session and the approval of both presbyteries involved. A candidate shall, at his request or at the request of his session, be allowed to withdraw from the care of the presbytery. But in such a case, sufficient reasons and any actions taken must be reported to the presbytery. The presbytery may also, for sufficient reasons, remove the name of the candidate from its roll of candidates. But in such a case, it shall report its actions and the reasons therefor to the candidate and to the session of his church. In all cases of a removal or withdrawal of a candidate, the sufficient reason for the action shall be recorded in the minutes of presbytery. We talked about this a little bit earlier. Sometimes it's necessary for a candidate to move to a different presbytery or to leave. You guys have thoughts on this or have seen it happen in some practical ways that we can discuss?
So is this kind of like the transfer portal and you're getting a trade from somebody else? Is that how it works, Scott, as the clerk?
Is that a sports thing?
Yeah. It's a really exciting thing to do trades when you're trading elders. Because it's transactional. I don't get to just push my trade on you. You have to agree. It's like fantasy football with real people, and there are changes in their lives. You're no longer a member of this presbytery. I don't care if Philadelphia Metro West receives you. You're gone. I've traded you. It is like that though. Like you'll get incoming requests, and you'll have to agree to them.
Scott just looked the happiest I've ever seen him look.
Oh yeah.
When
You
he
get
talked
fantasy
about getting
football
incoming
plus,
requests.
We don't get many incoming requests. We send people out. They don't come in.
Scott's going to develop a program now for fantasy presbytery.
Yeah, fantasy presbytery. Oh man, that Ascension's stacked. It has Jared Nelson, Nykerk, and.
What do you get? You get points for like point of order. Like you got to keep track of everything that happens in a meeting now if you're going to do fantasy stuff.
The Super Bowl.
Did you hear that question he asked that candidate on the floor? Man. Oh boy. We had a guy not long ago who had done all his candidacy internship in Covenant Presbytery and was going up to Heritage to pursue a call. But they wanted him to come and serve a little while and go through licensure and ordination kind of slow, which is, just the way that Presbytery has done things in the past as well. And so he transferred his candidacy up there, and we communicated to them he had finished his internship, and so he was kind of able to go and take all of his stuff with him. And it's good that Presbyterians can do that we can transfer candidates.
And dismiss them altogether.
Yes, thank you. Anything else on there? Okay. 18.8, our last paragraph here says an applicant coming as a candidate from another denomination must present testimonials of his standing in that body and must become a member of a congregation in the Presbyterian Church in America. He shall then fulfill the requirements of applicants listed under BCO 18.2, as well as requirements placed upon those desiring to be licensed or to become an intern as set forth in BCO 19. So since this is all of our first time reading this one today, with all of our great preparation.
This is what Jared was talking about earlier.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So is there anything else to say, I guess is the question. I guess not.
They just
Pretty
must shake
straightforward.
hands. They must
Man.
shake hands. This is like trading from, across different actual spheres. So you're not trading from within, you're going from the NFC to the AFC here.
See, and I used to think that if you had an accent, we just let you in without asking any questions. But of course, it seems that there's a little more to it than that. Yeah, this is good. This is speaking to some of our, and I don't mean this phrase in the way that a lot of people mean it, but some Reformed Catholicity, right? We're recognizing there are other Presbyterian Reformed denominations that are doing good work and have ministerial candidates that may be suitable for our denomination, and so we have ways of them coming in.
We have ways of poaching them.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Well, good. As you think back on 18, we're about to move into internship language in 19, and then licensure and ordination in 19, 20, 21. What else is there to say? Any summarizing thoughts? Anything still in your mind on this whole matter of candidacy?
Start early. I think that's kind of one of the lessons that we've gotten from this is start early and be proactive. You might be under neglected presbytery if you don't take some initiative to seek people out.
Yeah, no one's going to force you to complete your internship. No one's going to force you to submit your reports. Those are all things you need on your calendar, and you have to have timetables for. And perhaps what's helpful in the preparatory idea is just emailing the stated clerk of the presbytery, getting connected with the chairs of the credentials committee, and asking for everything, like every checklist they need in order to fulfill all those requirements, so that you know the time frames for everything that you must do when things are due and how you can complete them. And Mississippi Valley is very, structured. I mean, we had to actually turn in a massive document for our internship. It was like a portfolio almost that we did the X amount of things. We preached this many times. We did this many visits. We were I think one of the requirements was you must visit a prison and do prison ministry. And so it was if I didn't ask the chair of the credentials everything I needed to do, I would have lagged behind and not completed it. And so the things you need to do going into seminary is emailing the clerk of the presbytery you intend to be a part of and getting that information ahead of time so that you can complete it in a timely manner.
Very good. Thank you, gentlemen. As presbytery candidates everywhere will agree, this podcast is over. Thank you for spending time with us. If you're interested in learning more about what we've talked about, check out the show notes in your podcast player or at politymatters.org. As I'm sitting here looking at our screen, I know Jared serves on a credentials committee. I'm chairing credentials and covenant. Scott's a presbytery clerk. Any of us would be more than happy to talk to anybody listening about the details of these matters. If you're trying to figure out how to get involved as a candidate in your presbytery and you'd like to bounce ideas off of us, you guys know how to get in touch with us. You can find us on social media. PolityMattersFeedback@gmail.com is where you can send us an email if you want to. You can find the proper links for all this in our show notes if you need to go look for it. Thanks again for spending your valuable time with us. Until next time, say goodbye, gentlemen.
See you later.
Goodbye.
Y'all take care.